Apologies for the slight delay. My name is Kyle Ferrier. I'm a fellow and the Director of Academic Affairs of the Korea Economic Institute of America, and I'll also be your moderator for today's event. Before we get started with the discussion, I'd like to note that our speakers have written a great paper to go along with their talk, which I would highly encourage everyone to read as soon as we're finished up here. I'm sure the remarks will convey many of their key points of the paper, but to get all the details, of which there are many, you can find the paper on our website, keia.org. I'd also like to highlight that we are currently accepting paper proposals for our 2021 academic paper series through December 4th. Today's program is part of the series, which is truly a great way to get your research seen by a wide audience. And the series covers an equally wide array of topics related to Korea. Again, for more information on the open call, we refer you to our website, keia.org. Which leads me to why we're all here this morning. The climate crisis is one that impacts us all, and South Korea certainly has set high targets to do its part in the coming decades. South Koreans seem to have extra motivation to address the crisis in the face of deteriorating air quality. To help boost the economy, the Moon government has rolled out plans for a Green New Deal, promising to create new jobs and foster more climate-friendly economic growth. From the experiences of past administrations, however, we know this is a lot easier said than done. Our speakers today will look at South Korea's future energy plans and compare them with a complex reality, offering some important recommendations so that the country can meet both its energy demand and its climate and environmental concerns. I'm so glad to say that we're joined today by two great, two fantastic energy and policy experts on Northeast Asia. With us, we have Francesca Frasinetti, who is who received her PhD from the University of Bologna and is a fellow at the Asia Center at ISPI, Italian Institute for International Political Studies. And joining her is Francesco Sassi, who is a PhD candidate in geopolitics at the University of Bologna. His research focuses on geopolitics of energy security in Eurasia, and he was also previously a visiting researcher at the National University of Singapore, working on energy issues. So to start us off, both Francesca and Francesco have prepared slides for our presentation today, for their presentation. And they'll talk for about 30 minutes or so, which will then bleed over into our Q&A. And if you have any questions at any point during the presentation, I would highly encourage you to send them over using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So with that, I'll turn things over now to Francesca, who will start us off.
Thank you, Cal. Thank you for your assistance and coordination of the past few months, and the Korean Economic Institute for hosting us today. Also, on behalf of Francesca and myself, I would like to thank those who are watching for taking the time. And to follow what you said, I encourage researchers in the early stages of their careers, like Francesca and myself, to submit their proposals to the next round of academic paper series, because this is a tremendous opportunity and it's been a real pleasure working with you. So let me first share the screen and tell me if you can see my screen actually. Is it good?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, so what's been the main rationale behind the paper that has been published ahead of this virtual talk? Actually, against the backdrop of the unfolding new climate regime and the then pandemic-induced socioeconomic fallouts, we wanted to assess the advances and the major drawbacks in Korea's attempts to secure more environmentally and economically sustainable energy policies. As in the paper, this presentation will first delve into the complexities of promoting a concurrent nuclear and coal phase-outs on the part of the Moon administration, shedding light on the major hurdles, including market distortions that actually hamper the expansion of renewables. Then in the second part, Francesco will focus on the role of natural gas by scrutinizing key stakeholders and policy drivers drivers that actually have shaped a strategy in which the feasibility of natural gas to act as a sort of bridge in this pro-environmental shift is increasingly questioned, and even more so amid the pandemic-related trends in the fuels markets. So as part of our efforts, actually we've addressed also the potential implications of some LNG-related projects for the transition going forward, and then the policy implications parts. So just to let me give you some context first. As I'm sure most people attending the session are aware of, since South Korea cannot connect to the Eurasian continent, securing a stable supply of electric power has been the most important policy priority to maintain rapid growth, rapid economic growth, above any other concerns. As South Korea relies on only trace amounts of fossil fuel deposits, almost all energy resources needed are imported from overseas. And Korea's compressed development, as we call it, has been driven heavily by energy-consuming industries, such as petrochemicals, steel, and electronics. As a result, Korea's thirst for electricity has led consumption levels to climb by more than 400% over the past 3 decades. And here, actually, you have an overview of the main challenges confronting the energy policy in South Korea. Transforming the energy system requires addressing critical issues, including energy security on the supply side, providing clean and safe energy, affordability, but transitioning to a low-carbon economy implies also entering into a new climate regime. So conventionally, the sustainability of an energy system and the feasibility of the energy policy is assessed through this energy trilemma. And so here you see the performance of a country like South Korea. Being heavily producing country, stability of electricity is essential to its production. But in terms of sustainability, as you see, some hurdles remain. Although the service sector in the past few years has increasingly expanded, actually the bulwark of its economic structure is still made of those energy-intensive and export-oriented sectors. And actually, this makes very hard for the governments to lower the energy demand and consumption, which is critical for the energy transition going forward. As for the Moon administration, the current government has pledged to reduce energy consumption by 18.6%. We'll see if this is feasible or not. Because actually reducing energy consumption is critical also for the sake of the emissions targets, because actually electricity and heating in South Korea account for half of South Korea's emissions. And in this context, when we talk about also the environmental performance and the climate change issues, public acceptance has increasingly become an important factor in the choice of power sources and for the success of the energy security regime. So this has played out very vividly in 2 main fields. First of all, the fine dust field. And then I will talk about the issue of public acceptance in the nuclear policy field. Because President Moon's stance has been heavily influenced by the public outcry, let's call it, over the blanket of fine dust that has periodically enveloped large parts of the country, with detrimental effects for the quality of everyday life. So South Korea has the highest concentration of ultra-particulate matters in the OECD, and the magnitude of this issue is evident if we think, for example, that last year the State Council declared air pollution a social disaster following a pollution peak. Of course, this is a transboundary issue. We know that air pollutants from other parts of the region aggravate local air quality through seasonal fine dust, for example, from Mongolia and northern China. This calls for more regional cooperation. But actually, if we look at the data coming from the joint research project from China, Japan, and South Korea, they estimated that in 2017, 51.2% of the PM 2.5 increase registered in Korea came from domestic sources, while 32% came from, it was estimated to come from Chinese sources. Inevitably, this makes the stakes very high for the government's plan to accelerate transition, which is aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions and fine dust simultaneously through fostering green industrial policies and investments. And as air quality worsening becomes more and more visible to the naked eye, recent surveys confirm a high level of concern among the South Korean population, as opposed to the insignificant percentage of climate change deniers. Here, I'm showing you the findings from the Asan Institute survey carried out in December last year, which actually reflects a previous survey from Pew Research Institute in 2018. And so what is more, they also suggest a positive correlation between the skyrocketing PM levels and the public's perception of climate change. I'm recalling another survey from Seoul Dae, according to which for 3 years in a row, actually in South Korea, fine dust was found to be the top environmental news. And the fact that there is a high degree of climate change literacy within the domestic public, in my opinion, can be considered as a positive sign in terms of introducing those changes that are required to respond to the climate change challenges through sustained and mitigation actions. On the other side, the growing political and social salience of these issues actually puts authorities under extreme pressure. As shown, for example, by Gallup Korea, before the pandemic outbreak, the main reason for youngsters, people in their 30s, to actually not support the government was because of its interventions to stem fine dust, because they have been perceived as just high profile and let's call it one-off measures, for example, the seasonal curtailments to coal-fired plants. And of course, these findings can be explained in part by the cyclical nature of the issue, because seasonally we've observed that the anxiety from the public and the sense of urgency from the government to intervene actually tends to plateau and dissipate as the seasonal smoke curtains ends. So since I will talk about these maybe in the Q&A as the recent developments as we saw yesterday actually, but before that, let's recall how everything started for Moon, because Moon actually has been urged to lead the country away from environmental wrecking activities within and beyond national borders, which have been subject to even more robust scrutiny. Successive governments, we know in South Korea, have nurtured nuclear and power plants as the main source for South Korea energy and power production, whereas LNG and renewables were somewhat ignored. But in the wake of the Fukushima nuclear accident, actually the nuclear renaissance that we saw under the Lee Myung-bak administration became increasingly difficult to sustain. The nuclear fervor has further cooled due to the issues of the false safety tests for nuclear parts, but also due to the psychological fallouts from the various earthquakes during 2016 and 2018. We should remember in this regard that South Korea has the highest density of nuclear power plants. And recently, during summer, the reliability of the nuclear fleet, actually of South Korea, has been placed under severe stress under the typhoons that have hit the Korean peninsula, which have caused the shutdown of 6 reactors. And similar to many Western countries, in South Korea, nuclear power has reflected the conservative values, materialist values. We know that conservative political forces associate to nuclear power an imagery of strong self-defense, but also the symbol of that compressed economic growth. And because of that, we've seen for the past 50 years that actually Korea's energy policy was led by the technocracies from the government, the energy industries, and I would say that overall, the energy policy field was one of those policy fields in which the inputs from the societal level have hardly exerted actually any significant impacts against what we always call a top-down character when we refer to the South Korean policy devising process. But Moon, by revamping the progressive concept of the participatory government, actually has brought public engagement process also in this field, in the nuclear and energy transition policy field. We know that as a candidate, Moon promised to cancel the construction of every new power plant, and once elected, the oldest Korea's nuclear reactor was shut down, the Kori 1. And at that ceremony, actually, Moon declared that his administration would proceed into a post-nuclear era and announced that the construction of the 5th and 6th unit at the Shinkori plants would be temporarily suspended until the nation could produce a social consensus on them. And actually, the respondents, this deliberative poll actually voted to resume the construction in these 2 units, but actually voted to decrease the share of nuclear power plants in the longer term. And so based on these recommendations, the government resumed the construction of the Shinkori units, but has maintained its position of decreasing nuclear power plants in the long run. And as seen, actually, the parallel phase-out of coal and nuclear is the crux of the current energy strategy. The renewable share of total primary energy supply is forecast to expand steadily. However, a major hindrance is the slow advancements towards reaching grid parity, for example, which makes renewable produced electricity more expensive than that of traditional sources. And even with advancements in, for example, grid and storage centers, actually many hurdles persist. For example, in these regards, the continued government subsidy is required for the transition going forward. For example, the renewable energy subsidy scheme requires careful recalibration. And here I would like to, for example, briefly mention the fact that while Korea does have offshore wind potential, its onshore wind and solar potential are much more limited. And one of the main hurdles to further expanding solar and wind installations is the fact that over the past few years, the biomass industry has been overcompensated. And as shown, for example, by a recent report by the Seoul NGO, Seoul-based NGO Solution for Our Climate, due to years of overcompensation, biomass has become much more cost-effective amid the quota system. And the fact that biomass has become so artificially inexpensive comes at the detriment of investments into other renewables. So one of the main challenges for the government actually is to reverse this trend and incentivize utilities to actually reverse this trend and encourage them to invest in solar and wind technologies instead of, again, supporting the biomass expansion. Because this issue could further complicate Moon's strategy. And from here, I'd like to turn things over to Francesco.
So thanks, Francesca, for the presentation, and thanks to the Korea Economic Institute of America for welcoming us today. I will be looking at the Korea transition to a low carbon economic model through the role of natural gas. As you can see, as already Francesca said, the complications of increasing the penetration of renewable energy in the energy mix of South Korea have been joined by the trend of choosing LNG as the cornerstone of the climate mitigation efforts by South Korea in the next future. And by 2050, South Korea expects to constitute around 71% of its new power generation capabilities through natural gas and renewables. As you can see from the graph, the 9th Basic Energy Plan is already planning for 2034 this turn in energy production and generation capabilities in South Korea based on the role of natural gas, which has been sustained by the Moon's administration since the beginning of the new administration in 2017, but even during the presidential campaign. And the Moon has advocated for a very important role for natural gas, even if many plans have been announced during the years, like the 10th electricity plan in December 2017 and the 13th gas plan in 2018. Yet this plan, the 9th basic energy plan, which is going to be announced at the end of this year or maybe in the early months of the next one, is really the main important one. As you can see, natural gas is the only fossil fuel which is still very important by 2034 for South Korea. It is not shrinking its importance in the energy mix of the country. As Francesca said before, reducing coal consumption is essential for South Korea energy transition, and the new plan is already anticipating the conversion of around 24 aging coal plants into LNG fired units by 2034 for around 12.7 gigawatts, which is a very huge part of the generation mix in South Korea. At the same time, it's also important to evidence the price competitive characteristics that natural gas needs to have for boosting coal to gas switch in South Korea, which is essential to support the efforts of the Moon's government. At the same time, as you can see from the graph on the right side, there's a long and prolonged inverse relationship between the nuclear and gas in South Korea since 2011 and the Fukushima nuclear accident. As you can see in 2013, the growth of nuclear generation mix in South Korea has dropped to a very low level, and at the same time, natural gas has been substantially very high since 2011, and then in 2014, due to very high prices for oil indexed contracts, the nuclear power generation has increased while natural gas has suffered pretty much. And the government has worked on establishing a very powerful source for importing cheap natural gas in the country. And in 1983 has established KOGAS, which is the only company which is holding exclusive rights to build, manage, and operate all the infrastructural components of South Korea natural gas supply chain. And there have been many attempts to reform KOGAS throughout the years, as KOGAS is right now, and South Korea is right now the only case of real monopoly of natural gas among the OECD countries. So since the late 90s, South Korea has worked to increase the role of other players inside the natural gas supply chain and inside the within the natural gas sector, introducing more competition. So other private companies have joined, like POSCO, GS Caltex, and increasing private acquisitions since mid of 2000, like 2005 is the first acquisitions of a private company in South Korea of LNG. And right now they possess around 15–14% of natural gas market of the total imports of South Korea in just 1 year. Yet privates should directly consume their natural gas as they buy that on the global markets. And it should be very price competitive to KOGAS long-term contracts, which is another very strict requirements that Seoul is asking to these private companies. At the same time, KOGAS has grown its predominance in the natural gas sector, not just in Korea or in Northeast Asia, but around the world. As it has become very important for Seoul's energy diplomacy in the Middle East, in Southeast Asia, and with other many producing countries, natural gas producers around the world. Yet South Korea is one of the highest foreign dependency rates on natural gas imports. And at the same time, KOGAS has boosted its legitimacy as a monopolist in the country through its role of securing gas supplies and supporting South Korea energy diplomacy. Yet, as I told before, there have many attempts by the government to reform the sector since the late 90s, and they have been growing in the last years. Yet there is just not the problem related to the natural gas sector, but also to the relationship between KOGAS and who is in South Korea consuming the natural gas. So the really strict relationship between KOGAS and KEPCO, which is charged by KOGAS of paying very high city gas prices, yet with also the city gas power companies. But also KEPCO very controls the largest share of the country's generational capacity inside the country, and there's also a monopoly over transmission, distribution, sales, and retail. So KEPCO is essentially another monopolist inside the country. And in 2013, the company controlled around 85% of the country's generation capacity. So it's pretty much the same role of KEPCO is kept also by KOGAS in the supply chain of natural gas. So at the same time, power companies have been trying to balancing their budget sheets through cheap coal imports from Southeast Asia, which has increased the problem of boosting the coal to gas switch, as coal and cheap coal imports have been competing very much with the same natural gas all over the year. And even during the first year of the Moon administration in 2017, the coal fleet capacity of South Korea has eclipsed new natural gas generation capacities, which is another problem because cheap coal imports from Southeast Asia are really competitive with natural gas when the oil prices is really high. And at the same time, this very tight relationship between the two companies also creating high returns for maintaining operational some aging coal power plants in South Korea, which are now actually right now overcompensating for gas units negative balance sheets. As you can see in the lower graph, KEPCO is running some of the most important and gaining much from using these gas units, and independent power producers are gaining less than KEPCO, even if they have built their power plants in the last years. And even if they are very much more efficient compared to KEPCO, which can use its coal generation fleet to overcompensate whenever it's important to do so. As you can see in the up graph on the left side, there is another problem which KOGAS has faced in the last 10 years, 15 years. So in order to meet the domestic demand, it has accepted pretty much the revision of many gas contracts over the long term with countries from the Middle East, like Yemen, like Qatar, or even with Russia or other partners like Indonesia. So until very few years ago, KOGAS has always found itself on the weak side of the bargaining with gas producers. At the same time, this is also increasing very much the risks for boosting gas against not just coal and nuclear facilities, but also against investments on the renewable energy resources, as inefficient policies could lead gas and renewables to compete for the same financial supports. As you can see, this curve on the right side could be flattened as new renewables already outcompetes many new gas plants inside the country. So as much as new plants have been building through financial assistance from international financial institutions or Korean financial institutions, this could lead to very unbalanced relationship even between natural gas and renewables. At the same time, as I told before, many attempts of reforming the sector have been put in place in the new years. In 2018 and in 2019, Seoul has introduced a double economic incentive, adding more than 50% in fees on coal imports, which now amount to around $40 per ton, while LNG import tax have been lowered by 75% to around $20 per ton. So besides, the government is willing to encourage further investments in the natural gas sector, and it's willing to also refunding LNG import taxes whenever the source is used for combined heat and power sectors. So the government is boosting and is creating more incentives for the company to increase their efficiency in burning natural gas. At the same time, the lower import tax on natural gas is also lessening the impact of the Asian premium, which is very tied to the oil prices, international oil prices, and is also very heavy for the domestic gas prices and for the domestic gas consumers. So right now, the introduction of new tariff system in which KOGAS will negotiate with the single buyers and power utility gas prices is also boosting natural gas. We have seen that in the early months of 2020, Seoul has introduced a new incentives also for KOGAS to directly negotiate with private consumers inside Korea the natural gas prices. And this system will be like changing what has been the traditional way of KOGAS to negotiate with private companies inside the country. Okay, in the lower graph, you can see how diversified is right now in 2019 the imports of South Korea. Maybe we can go back to this later in the Q&A section. One very important thing is that significant volumes of new gas contracts are needed in the next 5 to 10 years, as many long-term contracts will expire in this time frame. And regarding this, it seems that Seoul has already chosen where to source this new natural gas, mainly from deepening its ties with the American companies. And under the Trump administration, LNG purchases have been pursued in order to reduce the trade deficit of the United States with South Korea. And so far, Seoul has been the largest buyer of US LNG. In 2019, this amounted to 7.2 billion cubic meters, which is the largest share of exports from the US. At the same time, Putin has also discussed very much directly with Moon some of the new projects which Russia is willing to implement in the next years. KOGAS is already a long-time customer of Gazprom from Sakhalin. And at the same time, KOGAS has established a strategic partnership with Russia over new gas pipelines and Arctic developments. And there's also a very deep involvement of South Korean companies with Novatek, which is the growing challenger of Gazprom inside the Russian gas market, gas sector, sorry. Okay, so now we would like to share with you some conclusion or policy implications which we have gained by writing this paper. Me and Francesca. Francesca will share the first part and the first policy implications. Thanks.
Okay, so in terms of the climate-related commitments, the preliminary findings, we could argue that a sustained political will is necessary, especially to send the right signal to the domestic actors within South Korea. In the paper, I'm touching upon this issue more in depth, to signal the need for domestic financial institutions and utilities, the necessity for many reasons, also including the risk of stranded assets, the reputation, brand image, to actually end coal power plants development abroad. And also, I've mentioned the issue of the high levels of climate awareness and literacy within the domestic public. So I would argue that the government should build upon and further enhance these resource and promote a wider debate on social and consumers' behavioral changes, because at the end of the day, behavioral changes and consumers' changings are the things required for the energy transition to go further. And these includes, of course, the necessity we've seen for the government to actually intervene on the energy tax structure, because the fact that over the past few years, the government has refrained to intervene and to touch upon this issue has been one of the major hindrances for the decarbonization of the economy. And all these challenges have actually been more stressed and more, I would say, made more visible by the stresses coming from the pandemic. And for the rest of our policy implications, I will turn it over to Francesco.
Yes, and sorry, yeah, something which is just related to natural gas and what we have discussed before is that LNG could be just an interim solution, like a short-term, medium-term, but not in the long term for sustaining Moon's climate sustainability actions and goals. There should be also better coordination among the domestic gas policies and the import strategies, which are very much tied together. And they need to aim to lower the imported gas prices in favor for an efficient transition towards a low carbon economy. There are many challenges ahead for South Korea, especially in the next 5 years. I think that's my opinion. And there is the need for a very continued oversight from the government over the natural gas sector, which needs to continue even during the next administrations. The next administration, at least the first one after Moon, And there's also a very stressing need to avoid financial competition between renewable and natural gas sectors. This is one of the major issues, I think, in the next future, even because the natural gas prices are actually right now down compared to the past, and this sector might be somehow perceived as a cheap one where to invest, maybe thinking about higher prices of the oil indexation in the next future. And there's also the challenge of the soon expiring contracts with Oman and Qatar, which are something around 30% of what right now South Korea is importing. And these volumes will need to be renewed in 2024. And South Korea is right about looking at other natural gas producers like the US and Russia, but even in East Africa, there might be some interest for South Korea. And also LNG is very likely to increase its consumption in the future as a fuel for vessels, as this suggestion comes from international organizations which are boosting natural gas as a source for vessel shipping around the world. Actually, the last point is COVID, which is impacting everybody and all sectors in the energy supply chain, which is very much sharpening the many dilemmas which are surrounding the South Korea climate transition, and achieving the energy targets and implementing climate mitigation efforts. South Korea will need to stress the coordination of the domestic gas policies and the import strategies of natural gas in the next future.
Thank you both for that very great presentation. It is very comprehensive and detailed, I think, which is often very hard to strike a good balance on. And I think the presentation added a lot of extra value to the paper itself, a lot of great additional visual resources to really help sort of reinforce the points that you make in your paper and throughout the presentation. So again, thank you both for speaking with us and being with us here today. I see a few questions in the queue, but before I get to those, I kind of wanted to ask one of my own first. And we've been very much focused on South Korea, and I think that's very important, but I always find it useful to sort of contextualize the Korean situation with other countries. And I can't imagine it's guaranteed smooth sailing for any other country that has attempted to lay out as ambitious of an energy plan moving forward. So I was hoping that you could shed light on some of the feasibility and support given to these plans and these projects. How do they compare to other countries vying to be climate leaders?
Well, being climate leaders using natural gas is pretty difficult. And I would suggest that this can be only a way for those countries which are right now very dependent on coal. And I think this is working great in Southeast Asia. This is naturally working great in Northeast Asia. So, but at the same time, the economic situation is very dissimilar between the two regions. And I think that South Korea is right now a very useful, can use this moment, this post-COVID situation for suggesting how to lead the transition of Northeast Asia. There are many possibilities to work with, to cooperate with Japan or even China on this, using, balancing, coordinating financial institutions inside the country, or even use somehow an international coordination. There are no international institutions which will boost this policy coordination. So the government is up to the government to do this. I think that South Korea has a great opportunity to lead somehow Northeast Asia, to show how a country can look at natural gas in the next 10 to 15 years. But these policies need to be very strictly related. There's the need to very strictly relate domestic policies with import strategies. Otherwise, it's really, really difficult to think that the competition between the natural gas importers in the area will not drive again the prices up in the next future. And this is going to hurt South Korea climate change policy for good.
Okay, so then the first question that we have from the audience is directed towards Francesca from one of your colleagues, Anna Napolitano, who is asking, given the major developments stemming from the nuclear phase out for the Korean nuclear industry, how do you see the future of the sector considering the central role it has played in sustaining the country's development?
So actually, this is a very good question because I've touched briefly upon the symbolic role of the natural industry, because it has been one of the main pillars of economic growth. And now we've seen that nuclear power is even more contentious issue. So we've seen that especially the stresses coming from the COVID, but even more so the stresses for the industry coming from the nuclear phasing out has put the government under extreme pressure, actually. And we are asking ourselves what could be the options for this industry going forward as the nuclear phase-out proceeds. Of course, this is not only a politically sensitive, but also it carries with it strong emotional strings attached. So as a result, there is an intense debate and a social consensus hasn't been found yet. So we've seen, for example, major developments concerning the nuclear industry in the past few months, this summer with the news about the Baraka nuclear energy plant that started to actually deliver electricity in the UAE. But actually, I would like to stress other options because the South Korean government is trying to actually test other options for the future of the nuclear industry in terms of building and opening up nuclear decommissioning research centers. And although the nuclear decommissioning market is not the size of the nuclear industry in Korea yet, it could hold some possibilities and future prospects for the country. For example, so they've started research and they plan to open these research centers on nuclear decommissioning in South Korea, but they also signed some deals, some cooperation agreements, for example, with a Canadian enterprise to send actually Korean engineers overseas, and this would be the first time, and also with other countries in Eastern Europe. So the nuclear decommissioning research could be a feasible option for the reconversion and transformation of the nuclear industry of South Korea.
Thank you. The next question comes on another area of energy potentially for South Korea from Chiara Monetti, who asks, since hydrogen has been presented as the most compatible option with the EU's climate neutrality plans, could you please explain to us the role, if any, of hydrogen in Korea's energy transition?
Okay, thank you. This is another very good question because I haven't talked about hydrogen in the presentation, but actually is one of the main resources for Moon's energy transition policy. So if I'm not mistaken, the target for hydrogen going forward is to base the power consumption by 2040 on 5% of hydrogen. And actually, South Korea has already shown some signs of being a front runner in the industry. And Moon has made the hydrogen economy one of the three main strategic investment areas, and so has chosen hydrogen as an engine for economic growth. For example, last year, South Korea had the largest number of charging stations, and it was number one in terms of selling hydrogen vehicles. However, there is something related to the rationale behind the strategy, because unlike many countries, for example, also in Europe, but also the strategy towards hydrogen of the European Union, actually, I would argue that for South Korea, the strategy is primarily driven by economic growth and industrial competitiveness concerns rather than environmental concerns. We should also point out that in terms of reaching the future targets, actually South Korea aims to have 70% of the hydrogen national demand met by clean hydrogen. But this means that for a long period of time, the rest will come from gray hydrogen. So using natural gas, for example. And in terms of environmental sustainability, this poses some doubts.
Thank you for that great answer. We have another question which comes in from Florence Lowlee of the Global America Business Institute, who asks, one of your charts show that more than 40% of Korea's energy mix would be from renewable sources by 2034. Given Korea's geographical location and size, it's a very ambitious plan unless there is some sort of technological breakthrough with these renewable energy options. Have either of you looked at the breakdown of the different renewable energy sources and how the nation is planning to achieve this goal?
Well, it's very complicated to look at the precise share of each and every renewable energy resources in the next future. I share Florence's ideas. These plans are really, really, really ambitious, even because of the size of the geographical size of South Korea. The point is that offshore wind is likely working very good for even an industrial, from an industrial point of view. So localizing the production of offshore wind turbines and components in South Korea is very achievable. So I think offshore wind will play a very conspicuous size in the next future of South Korea's domestic investments on the renewables. Onshore wind is not going to play a very high and intense role on this point. And from the solar point of view, well, solar comes with some other problems with China and how South Korea decides to import solar panels from China, which is right now also a political issue between the two countries. And also how South Korea will use its internal and industrial capabilities of producing solar panels inside the country for boosting this renewable revolution, which the Moon's administration has been advocating for South Korea. So the balance is really difficult to achieve. I think offshore wind will likely play some very important role. So I would suggest to look at this the sector and the supply chain developing inside South Korea.
And If I may add something on this, I would also point that the major tool, the major means to support the expansion of renewables technologies is the RPS, and so the RPS scheme has undergone some changes between 2019 to 2022, and I think that the changes in the share within the scheme will help, especially the expansion of solar PV installations.
So I know we're at time, but since we started a little late, I'm going to ask one more question to make up for that. And I want to sort of end on geopolitics, if I may. Both in the paper and in the presentation, you talk about looking to diversify new sources with Russia and the United States. On the United States, in the paper, you say whoever wins the election, the energy trade is going to be really important still. So I kind of wanted to focus a little bit more on the Russian side here, because I think there's some added interesting tidbits or aspects of potential Russia cooperation with LNG. So it's a two-parter question. So on the first, how important is cooperation with Russia on the Arctic gas exploration project? Is this just another effort to diversify, or could it have added strategic value considering the growing perceived importance of the Arctic for geopolitical and geoeconomic reasons? And so Russia, Arctic, Korea, first question. And the second question is more about the Korea, Russia, potentially possible trans-Korean gas pipeline. Considering all the other options that South Korea has to meet its energy needs, how vital would this gas pipeline from Russia really be in some sort of breakthrough with North Korean diplomacy? How much would this really matter? Not so much for North Korea, but for South Korea, for its own domestic energy needs?
So talking about the last question about Trans-Korean pipeline, which discussion is like going on forever. Back in time, it really is even difficult to find the initial discussion about this pipeline project in the past. So I think that time to build a consistent pipeline network from Eastern Siberia into South Korea has gone right now. And this point is, and the reasons are many. It's just not just on Russia, not just on North Korea, not just on South Korea. I think that would have been a really important way to shape the overall scenario of gas cooperation in Northeast Asia. But and I think that was industrially, economically, and politically feasible many years ago. But yeah, that also lack of political solidity, that project, and that was the real reason for the impossibility of building a Trans-Korean pipeline. So I think the project would have maybe boosted natural gas consumption in South Korea right now to higher level, and it would have been very important to lower coal consumption in the last 10 years at least. But right now it's very difficult to sustain that kind of project when we are thinking about natural gas as a global commodity. That's the point. So a natural gas pipeline is really costly. It's really politically, it needs much political commitment, which Russia and China have been able to implement to boost this project, but it's really difficult to think about Russia building a gas pipeline inside South Korea right now or in the next 5 to 10 years. The first question you said was about the South Korea interest in the Arctic, right? The project and the discussion and the negotiations between KOGAS and Novatek this time have been ongoing since late 2016 and 2017, after KOGAS left the first project, Yamal LNG, back in 2014 because of the annexation of Crimea and the problems of sanctions, right? South Korea is really interested in what's going on in the Arctic, is not willing to play some great power politics there. I think nobody, neither in Seoul or in Moscow, thinks about that. At the same time, I think that the Arctic as a way to diversify imports of natural gas has shown very positive signals in the last 2-3 years, at least since Yamal LNG has started to become productive. And South Korea has received some cargoes from Novatek or even the other companies working together with Novatek, like Total. And I think the next project, Arctic LNG 2, will be very interesting, even if KOGAS is not participating in the project through equities. This windows has closed in 2019 with the final investment decision of September 2019. But I think that the new way of Novatek to shaping the exports of natural gas from Russia to Northeast Asia is really valuable as a source of diversification, and especially has Novatek as a very aggressive and very intelligent way to marketing natural gas in the area, is like willing to boost the creation of a Russian hub price in the region, which is something that Gazprom has tried to do for at least the last 15 years, 10 years, especially with the Vladivostok LNG project, which was also approached by not just by the Japanese companies, but also by Korean companies, which are right now acquiring gas from Sakhalin gas project. But the new plans of Novatek are really interesting for, I think, not just South Korea, but also Japan and also China.
Well, thank you both. This has really, truly been an excellent discussion, and I really hope all of you who are listening, please check out their paper on our website. It covers a lot of what they mentioned here, but I think it really serves to emphasize many of the key points and implications that were made. And before we go though, I would like just to raise a couple of upcoming programs that we have, just bring to everyone's attention, coming up tomorrow and on Monday. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, we have Korean Diplomacy in the UN, a conversation between Ambassador Cho Hyun, the permanent representative of the Republic of Korea to the United Nations, and KEI President Kathleen Stevens. It should be a great conversation. Highly encourage you to attend that. Very wide-ranging discussion on all different issues that are important to Korea right now at this very important context right before the U.S. presidential elections. And then on Monday, from 2 to 2:30 p.m., same time, Monday, we have China's High Volume Korean War Commemoration, a conversation with Yoon Sun, director of the Stimson China Project, China Center Program, excuse me, looking at how the Chinese recently have been commemorating their participation in the Korean War, and how that has changed from how the recent comments have changed from previous years, and what that sort of suggests moving forward. I know this is two very important two very important topics, so I hope you will also be able to join us for that as well after today's program on a very important topic with two very important people as well. So thank you all for joining, and I look forward to seeing you all hopefully on Friday and Monday again. Thank you.